East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms 1000–1800 AD. This is the area or region surrounding the Great Lakes of East Africa, which include Lake Victoria, Lake Kyoga, Lake Albert, Lake George, Lake Edward and Lake Tanganyika. It includes parts of western Uganda, northern Tanzania, parts of Kenya, Rwanda and Burundi. Between 1000–1800, many kingdoms came up in this region after the migration and settlement of different groups of people in East Africa. The most important kingdoms included Banyoro Katara, Banyoro, Buganda, Ankole, Toro, Karagwe and Wanga, among others. Most of the origins of these kingdoms are not clear. Instead, they are based on myths or legends. A sketch map showing the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The Abate-Mbuzi or the Tembuzi or Bakoma. The origins of the Abate-Mbuzi. The Abate-Mbuzi are believed to be the first people to settle in the Interlacustrine region. Their origin is not clear, but historians have come up with theories of what may have been their origin. They were also known as a Bakoma. Oral traditions suggest that these people preceded the Chyz who lived during the time of creation. They were believed to be demigods or semi-gods and were able to perform miracles. Other traditions in western Uganda suggest that the Tembuzi fell from heaven and thus had miraculous powers. The Tembuzi could indeed die but just disappeared or went back to heaven at the end of their earthly life. They established the Banyoro Katara Empire around Lake Victoria. Their dynasty lasted for 4 generations. The Tembuzi dynasty is believed to have been founded by Ruhanga, creator or god, assisted by his brother Ankaya. Ruhanga therefore became their first ruler. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. Since Ruhanga had no children, he used the 4 sons of Ankaya to start his society. These sons were Karu, Kima, Kakomatwale and Kintu. Karu became the ancestor of cultivators or farmers. Kima became the ancestor of herders, while Kakomatwale the ancestor of rulers. Local traditions claim that Ruhanga, Ankaya and the 4th son Kintu went back to heaven and left Kakoma to rule the earthly kingdom. Later, Kakomatwale disappeared to heaven and was succeeded by his son Boba. Boba was later succeeded by Nganzaki. Nganzaki was succeeded by Isaza, who is recorded as the last ruler of the Tembuzi dynasty. When Isaza disappeared, his gatekeeper Bukakri succeeded him through the use of force and modern Amota, but people refused to recognize him as their leader. After the collapse of the Tembuzi dynasty, the Chyz took over the Interlacustrine region. The contribution of the Tembuzi to the history of East Africa. Explain the contribution of the Tembuzi to the history of Banyoro Katara Empire. The Tembuzi are believed to have been the first inhabitants of the Interlacustrine region. Their origin is not clear. They introduced a centralized system of administration with recognized chiefs. They introduced mixed farming. They introduced systems of clans like the Akakoma ruling class, the Bahima class of herdsmen, and the Beru class of farmers. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The origins of Tiz Empire are not clear. Most of what is known about them is derived from myths and oral traditions. The foundation of Banyoro Katara kingdom was laid down by the Bokwazi in 1350. Banyoro Katara was founded after the disappearance of the Abate-Mbuzi. The Abate-Mbuzi were therefore the first occupants of this kingdom. The founders of this kingdom, the Bokwazi, were believed to have come from north and north-east. The Bokwazi were demigods, possessed supernatural powers and performed miracles. They are believed to have been either Gala, Cushites from Ethiopia, Egyptians, Greeks or Portuguese. They moved southwards and settled in the Interlacustrine region of East Africa. Others claim that they were probably Bantu-speaking people. They were believed to have entered Uganda through the north or northeast. The dynasty in the Banyoro Katara Empire was founded by Ntahira Bambai, a grandson of Isaza, the last Tembuzi ruler. At its peak, the empire consisted of parts of Banyoro, Toro, Ankole, Karagwe, Buganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Wanga and Bogazaya and parts of Busoga. Its capital was at Bigobaya in Eugene. The Chyz rule lasted for 4 to 5 reigns, stretching from 1350 to 1550. After this period, it collapsed following the Luo invasion. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The empire was divided into small states or provinces, districts and counties, each under a chief. Chiefs were close relatives of the Omukoma and formed a council of representatives. Bigabiyamajieni was the capital of Banyoro Katara Empire. The rulers lived in reed palaces with palace officials, women and slave artisans. The Chyz palaces were protected by enclosures called a Bimbo. The Chyz Empire had a large standing army that fought using spears, bows and arrows. The Chyz army also dug ditches around their capital and cattle kraals for purposes of protection. The Chyz had a royal regalia which included the royal crown, royal drum and spears. These were symbols of power respected by everyone. Social organization. The Bokwasi had two classes of people in society, i.e. the Bahima and Beru. Beru were cultivators while Bahima were pastoralists and rulers. They built grass-thatched huts smeared with cow dung and decorated inside with a variety of handcrafts. They were great sportsmen who spent their free time playing games, e.g. Onwiso and Wrestling. They were great hunters who used long spears. They built reed palaces for the Omikoma to stay in. Religiously, they believed in many gods. They had many strange and supernatural powers and could even disappear when annoyed. Economic organization. They were a pastoral group who mainly kept longhorned cattle. The Chwezi were also farmers who grew coffee, beans and millet. The Chwezi also carried out ironworking and made implements like hoes, pangas and spears. They were also involved in pottery and made round balls, jars and shallow basins. They made handcrafts which they used to decorate their huts. Basket weaving also came with them. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. They also made cowhide sandals. They were great hunters who hunted using long spears. They involved themselves in barter trade with their neighbors, exchanging iron implements and salt for food. The decline of the Chwezi Empire. It's not clear why the Chwezi Empire declined or collapsed at the beginning of the 19th century. The empire had grown too big in size to be effectively administered. The empire lacked strong and capable rulers, especially after the death of Omikoma Amora. Misfortunes, e.g., death of the darling cow by Hogo scared the Bokwasi, who were forced to migrate. Widespread internal rebellions, especially from the Bantu, also led to the decline of the Chwezi Empire. Epidemics like smallpox and malaria claimed many of their animals since they were a pastoral community and they ended up migrating to other areas. Famine also broke out in the region, forcing many people to leave the area in search of new areas that could provide them with food. The Chwezi rulers were greedy and oppressive, which annoyed their subjects, hence creating rebellions within the empire. The Chwezi also lost their popularity, especially after people had realized that they were ordinary human beings, not semi-gods, which undermined their power. Conflicts among the various princes over power also weakened their hold on power and influence. Several communities broke away from the Chwezi Empire, for example Buganda, Bunyoro, Ankle, leading to the decline of their power and influence. The Luo invasion is what finally weakened the Chwezi Empire, i.e. the Luo set up the Luo Bitu dynasty and forced the Chwezi to flee in different directions. The importance of the Bokwasi in the history of East Africa. They introduced a centralized system of governance which was later adopted in many societies. They introduced the hierarchical system of administration whereby administration was broken. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The Chwezi also introduced the system of having a royal regalia comprising of the symbols of power in a community like the drums and spears. The Bokwasi were the founders of the ancient Bunyoro kingdom, which spread from western Uganda to western Kenya and northern Tanganyika. They introduced games which are still popular in Uganda today, like local wrestling and Onwiso. The Bokwasi also introduced coffee and banana growing in East Africa, which are still cash crops. The Chwezi introduced the idea of palace officials, royal women and slave artisans who were trained in administration. The Chwezi are also remembered for their supernatural powers, i.e. they were a strange group of people who performed miracles and could disappear when annoyed. They introduced a religion called the Vishomi, which is still evident up to today in western Uganda, particularly in Bunyoro. They built their capital at Bigabia, which is still a tourist attraction for Uganda today. The Bokwasi introduced the idea of royal enclosures of iron palaces such as Bigo, Muba, NTC and Kabingo. These were mainly for protecting cattle. The Chwezi also introduced the idea of grass-thatched houses smeared with cow dung and decorated with a variety of handcrafts inside. The Chwezi also introduced social classes in society, especially in western Uganda, where the Beru are the cultivators and subjects, while the Bahima are the cattle keepers and ruling class. They introduced iron working and they made implements such as spears, pangas, hoes, etc. They discovered hot springs like Kitagota in western Uganda. They also developed the art and craft industry, e.g. they introduced basket weaving. They also introduced bark cloth manufacture. The Bunyoro Kingdom. Origins. The Kingdom of Bunyoro came up after the collapse of the Chwezi of Bunyoro Empire. It began as a small kingdom under the Babitu rulers. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The growth and expansion of Bunyoro greatly depended on its rulers, i.e. Abakoma e.g. Omikoma Kamirosi 1850 to 1869 and Omikoma Kabega 1870 to 1897. The kingdom stretched as far as Buganda, Toro and Ankle in the west to Busoga in the east, and West Nile in the north. Factors for the growth and expansion of Bunyoro. The presence of able leadership, i.e. Bunyoro was gifted with strong, active and ambitious Leaders, for example, Omikoma Kamirosi and Omikoma Kabelka, who expanded the kingdom. The kingdom had a highly developed centralized system of administration which ensured easy administration. The strong army of Abarusa built by Kabelka also contributed to the growth of Bunyoro. It was armed with guns got through trade with the Khatamas and coastal Arabs. Bunyoro was also gifted with fertile soils which ensure a constant supply of bananas, yams, and millet to sustain the population. Her good climate with heavy rainfall also supported agriculture to sustain the population. Bunyoro also expanded because it constantly raided her weak neighbors, for example Ankul, Toro and Busoka. Bunyoro also participated in trade with her neighbors and also participated in the long-distance trade LDT with the Arabs and Khatamas where she got guns. Bunyoro had iron deposits and through iron working she was able to make spears and arrows for defense. Bunyoro also had plenty of salt deposits which she used to exchange with her neighbors. The decline of the Chwizi dynasty also favored the growth and expansion of Bunyoro kingdom. This gave a chance to Rukidi Mpuga to start up his own empire, i.e. Bunyoro. The structure or organization of Bunyoro kingdom. Political organization. The kingdom had a centralized system of administration with the Omikoma as the political head. Omikoma had absolute powers, i.e. to appoint, promote and dismiss any of his chiefs. The kingdom was divided into provinces, districts and counties, each under a chief or effective. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The chiefs had to provide the Omikoma with gifts such as cattle, beer, grains and men to serve in the army and at the palace. Chiefs were also responsible for tax collection and ensuring law and order within the kingdom. Initially, Bunyoro had no standing army and therefore all able-bodied men would be called upon to form an army and the general would be appointed by the Omikoma. The army had the duty of defending the kingdom against external threats, expanding the kingdom, carrying out raids and spying on the Omikoma's enemies. Social organization. The Bunyoro had classes in their society with the Bahima as the rulers and the Baru as the subject class. Religiously, the Bunyoro believed in a supreme being called Ruhanga, god who was believed to be the creator of all things. Apart from Ruhanga, the Bunyoro had many other small gods and each clan and family had its own favorite god. The Bunyoro had national gods like Kwamara, god of plenty, Mujizi, god of Lake Albert and Muhigo, the god of war. Sacrifices were always offered to these gods to please them. The Bunyoro also had royal regalia which included drums, spears, animal skins, the throne, royal crown, and these were highly respected as symbols of power. The Bunyoro were always united by a similar culture, language and way of dressing. Economic organization. Cattle rearing were the main economic activity of the Bahima, and the herdsmen always moved with their cattle in search of pastures and water. Agriculture or crop growing was practiced by the lower class of peasants Beru, and they mainly grew millet. Salt mining was another economic activity in Bunyoro got from Lake Katwe. Salt was used for feeding animals and the rest was exported to her neighbors like Buganda. The ironworking industry was also developed in Bunyoro and they manufactured hoes, spears and pangas. Trade was another economic activity of Bunyoro. She traded with her neighbors and also East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. These who stayed near Lake Albert and rivers carried out fishing. Revenue was also collected from vassal states, e.g. Buganda and Acholi, which were supposed to pay tribute to the Omikoma. The Bunyoro also engaged in hunting for food, elephants for ivory, and the rhino for horns. The army of Bunyoro always raided its neighbors for slaves and ivory, hence contributing to the economy. The reign of Omikoma Kabelga. Kabelga was born in 1830 to Omikoma Kamirosi. He spent his early years in Buliga where he acquired the name Kabelga, meaning son of Buliga. After the death of his father in 1869, Kabelga was involved in a power struggle with his brother Kabagumaya. Kabagumaya was supported by the royal family and provincial chiefs. Kabelga used the support of the commoners, Arab mercenaries and his father's bodyguards to defeat his brother. Kabelga ascended to power in 1870. The contributions of Kabelga. He started with the defeat of the opposition from the royal family by killing and exiling members of the royal family and chiefs who supported his rival brother Kabagumaya. Kabelga established a highly centralized administration with him as the political head. He had a chain of chiefs in the provinces to ensure stability. Kabelga built a strong standing army of the Ebarusula, well armed with guns acquired from the LDT with Arabs. Kabelga destroyed the social system of classes in the society and even appointed commoners to positions of responsibility. Kabelga expanded the kingdom to occupy areas such as Toro, Biwamba, Buliga, Katwe, Lango, Buganda, etc. and many others. This was done with the help of the Abarusula. Kabelga encouraged trade with the coastal Arabs and Khatamas from the north, e.g. Bunyoro supplied ivory and salt, and in return she got guns. Cabelga encouraged the Banioro to grow enough food, especially millet, to reduce famine. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. Cabelga encouraged the spirit of nationalism among the Banioro. For example, he always reminded them of the Baganda threat and that if it didn't unite, Buganda would finish them off. However, Cabelga's program of building Banioro was interfered with by the British. In 1891, he engaged the British in guerrilla warfare as he resisted colonial rule. In 1898, he was captured in Langa with Mwanga and was sent to exile in Seychelles Island. Cabelga died later in 1923 in Guinea as he tried to return to Banioro from exile. Cabelga was buried at Amparo in present-day Hoima district. The decline of Banioro Kingdom. The kingdom had grown too big, which made it very hard for effective administration. Weak leadership, especially after Omikoma Cabelga, also led to the decline of Banioro. The steady growth of Banioro's neighbours, e.g. Buganda and Kultura, also weakened her. Internal conflicts within Banioro also lead to her decline, e.g. vassal states constantly revolted against Banioro. The loose confederation of chiefdoms and breakaway of areas such as Buganda, Tora and Ankul also meant loss of revenue for the kingdom. The iron-rich deposits of Kruki were taken away by Buganda, which meant that Banioro would not make enough arrows and spears for defence. Frequent revolts by the Banioro princes also weakened the kingdom. For example, Omikoma Kasagoma established the kingdom of Tora. In the late 19th century, Buganda started trading with the Arabs who supplied her with guns to strengthen her army that managed to defeat Banioro. The arrival of the British increased Buganda's power and supported her campaigns that led to the final defeat of Banioro. Famine and hunger also led to massive loss of lives, which reduced the population of the kingdom. Diseases and natural calamities like floods also led to the decline of the kingdom. 2. Buganda Kingdom. Origins. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. Its origin is not clear. However, a number of theories have been put forward to explain the origins of Buganda. According to oral traditions in Buganda, Kintu was the first Muganda believed to have come from the direction of Mt. Algonquin came from the east. He is said to have come with 13 or 14 of the present-day clans in Buganda. According to traditions in Banioro, the founder of Buganda was Prince Koto Kaima, who was a twin brother to Princess Ngoma Rukidi Mpuga, the founder of the Beto dynasty in Banioro. He is said to have come with 5 or 6 of the present-day clans in Buganda. Other traditions claim that Buganda originated from the Bantu clans that migrated from Congo Basin. Buganda sprung up after the collapse of the Sietwezi Empire with only 3 countries, i.e. Kaidondo, Marikota and Busero. In the 17th century, Kaboka Katarega began her systematic expansion by annexing Gombe, Sengo, Butembola and Kayagui. Around the 18th century, 1750, many immigrants arrived from Banioro, Mt. Elgonaria and SC's islands to increase her population. Between 1780 and 18th century, Kaboka Junji waged war against Banioro and managed to annex Badu and Kuki, which were rich in iron. Between 1814 and 1881, Kaboka Sekamania annexed Biwekula and Biwira and added them to Buganda. Between 1831 and 1851, Kaboka soon finally attacked Banioro and crushed it. Still in the same period, Kaboka Mwanda tried to annex Busoga but failed in his attempt, not until Kaboka Kaibagu's reign that Busoga was finally crushed. In the late 19th century, Buruli, Malgola, Bulamizi and Bujura were annexed to Buganda as Banioro was declining. In the 1900 Buganda Agreement, Buganda was given the 2 lost counties of Bioga and Bugangezi. This stretched her territory from Lake Albert in the west to River Nile in the east up to northern Tanzania in the south. A sketch map showing expansion of Buganda Kingdom. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. Buganda was gifted with fertile soils and good climate, which ensured production of mattock to feed her big population. Buganda established trade links with the coastal Arabs and was able to obtain guns that helped her to expand. Buganda had well-developed roads that connected the whole kingdom, which eased the movements of people and their goods. Buganda had a highly centralized system of administration which ensured stability in the kingdom. Buganda had strong and capable leaders, e.g. Kaboka Asunit, Kaboka J. Junjik, Kaboka Asekamania, etc., who expanded the kingdom to greater heights. The Kaboka married from all the major tribes of Buganda, which created unity and loyalty of the people. Buganda took advantage of her weak neighbours to expand, e.g. Banioro lost a lot of land to Buganda. The Kaganda society had division of labour whereby women engaged in agriculture while the men concentrated on trading, fishing and fighting to defend the empire. The geographical location of Buganda also gave her a security advantage, e.g. Lake Victoria in the south, River Nile in the east and Lake Kyoga in the north provided natural defence. Barriers against enemies. Uganda also absorbed/conquered small communities, which led to increase of her population. The coming of the British also led to the expansion of Uganda because they offered her enough support in defeating Baniora. The constant supply of tributes from conquered states also strengthened Uganda's economy, e.g. from Busoga. Uganda had a royal guards whereby all able-bodied men were supposed to go for compulsory military training so that they could defend the kingdom. The structure or organization of Uganda Kingdom. Political organization. Uganda had a highly centralized system of administration. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The kingdom was subdivided into counties Esozes, sub-counties Gombolula, parish Muluka, sub-parish Ektangul and village Kailo. Each of these was led by a chief for effective administration. The chiefs were supposed to mobilize people for public works, e.g. construction of roads. Uganda had a legislative council called the Kiko Parliament, which was to formulate laws and advise the Kaboka. The Kaboka had royal bodyguards called the Bambor, and these were charged with protecting the Kaboka at his palace and on journeys and functions. The Kaboka received gifts from his subjects and chiefs as a sign of loyalty, and in return they would be rewarded with large chunks of land. Social organization. Socially, Uganda was organized on clan basis. Every Uganda belonged to a particular clan, e.g. Lion and Polkrum among Kinkima Buffalo and Boko. Marriage in Uganda was polygamous. Members of the same clan were not allowed to get married. Each of the clans had a clan head Omikulu Wikika and a special area of origin, Obutaka. Kaboka was the head of all clans Esabatoka and belonged to the clan of his mother. The Baganda were divided into classes, i.e. royal caste for men of Balangira women, Abambidjia, nobles of Bakangu, peasants/commoners of Bakupi and slaves of Badu. The Kaboka was the spiritual leader of Uganda and was considered semi-divine. The Baganda believed that small gods Lubal whom they consulted on various occasions, e.g. Dungu hunting, Musu crane, Mukosa fishing, and Walam death, etc. The Baganda also believed in witchcraft and sorcerers of Balogo who were consulted by those who wanted to harm others. The Baganda had a royal regalia which included drums, backcloth, spears which were highly respected. Virginity was highly respected in Uganda because it was a sign of good upbringing and respect. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. They also domesticated and kept animals like cows, sheep, goats, chicken and rabbits. Fishing was also carried out on the shores of Lake Victoria. Ironworking was also practiced and they made implements such as knives, pangas and spears. The cloth making industry was also developed in Uganda. The Uganda also participated in a long-distance trade with the coastal Arabs, mainly acquiring guns in exchange for slaves and ivory. Uganda also received tributes from her vassal states to supplement on her revenue, for example from Busoga and Toro. Taxation was another source of revenue and it was the duty of chiefs to collect taxes. Raids were also important in Uganda's economy. For example, she raided Banioro, Busoga, for cattle, slaves and ivory. Reasons for Uganda's decline. The kingdom was too big to be effectively administered. Lack of able leadership, especially after the death of Kaboka Mutisa I in 1884. Attacks from vassal states, e.g. Busoga greatly weakened the kingdom. Land conflicts with Banioro also increased hostilities with her neighbours. Internal conflicts, especially power struggles, led to disunity in the kingdom. Disunity because of social classes also weakened her military strength. Natural calamities like floods and diseases, especially sleeping sickness, which killed many people. The coming of missionaries also led to disunity within the kingdom, hence her decline. The coming of colonialists who effectively led to the loss of her independence. 3. Ankle Kingdom. Origins. Ankle was one of the kingdoms that came up after the decline of Banioro Kitara of the Chwezi. Traditions in western Uganda claim that Rukidi Mpuku, a son to Vamara, was the founder of Ankle Kingdom. The kingdom was established in southwestern Uganda in the 15th century. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. Its expansion started around the 18th century during the time of Bagab. From its establishment, the Hema and Beru were its occupants. They spoke a common language of Rani and Kor. The Bahima upper-class pastoralists were the ruling class and the Beru were the ruled. Political organization. Ankle had a centralized system of administration. The Omugabe king was the political head of the kingdom. The Omugabe's position was hereditary with absolute powers. The Omugabe, queen mother, princes and princesses formed the royal family and resided in the royal palace. The Omugabe was assisted by the Nganzi prime minister, who was the most important of all chiefs. Ankle was divided into 10 districts, each headed by Omukungu chief. Some of the districts included Mbarara, Ibanda, Naibashozi, Bonaruguru and Kashari. The Omigate and Nganzi came from the upper class of the Hema and always kept large herds of cattle and estates. The Abakangu also kept cattle and were in charge of keeping peace and sending beer and millet to the royal palace. Ankul had royal regalia that included spears, a crown and that royal drum, Vajiandanwa. Ankul also had a royal fire that was never allowed to go out until the reigning Omigate died. Ankul had no standing army, but in case of war, all able-bodied men were supposed to gather at the Omigabe's palace with spears, bows, arrows, and shields. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. Religiously, the Bani Ankul believed in a supreme being called Ruhanga who was thought to be the creator of the world. No prayer and sacrifices were offered to Ruhanga because they believed there was no need of bothering him after bringing them into the world. Below Ruhanga were other lesser gods, e.g. Kagoro, Kazoba, Omusisi, etc., to whom prayers and sacrifices were offered. The Bani Ankul highly respected spirits of the dead, and sacrifices, e.g. beer and milk, were offered to them at family shrines. Owning cattle was a sign of prestige, and those with few cows were always despised. The Bani Ankul were united by a similar culture, Rani Ankul language, and same way of dressing, e.g. Omishanana. Economic organization. Pastoralism was the main occupation of the Bani Ankul, and they kept long-horned cattle, mainly dominated by the Bahima. The Beru also carried out cultivation and mainly grew millet. Blacksmithing was another activity of the Bani Ankul, and they made spears, hoes, and arrows. Trade was also carried out, and they exchanged commodities like ivory with their neighbors and with coastal Arabs. Carpentry was also carried out by the Bani Ankul, and they made very beautiful wooden pots, dishes, and other items. 4. Karagwe Kingdom. Origins. Karagwe Kingdom extended between Rwanda and Burundi, Lake Victoria in the north western part of Tanganyika. The settlers in this area were Bantu who carried out farming and grew crops like millet, sorghum. They had come from the southwest around the 15th and 16th century. However, the Bantu are said to have stayed in this region for 43 centuries before migrating northeast to Bunyoro and Toro. Later, a section of these returned to Karagwe after the Luo invasion. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The establishment of Ruhinda's rule in Karagwe. After the Luo invasion, Ruhinda led his Chwezi immigrants from Bunyoro Katara to Karagwe. He deposed over the local leader known as Nano, and he set up the Hinda dynasty. He established his rule in Karagwe and built his capital at Biwahangwe. He then sent his sons with royal regalia like spears to establish Hinda dynasty in all the surrounding areas. This gave rise to small sub-dynasties under his sons. These sub-dynasties included Chisoka, Kayamtwara, Iangiro, Buzians, Busivai, Yuko, and Natha. The creation of several independent Hindu sub-dynasties by Ruhinda's sons created rivalries, and these weakened the Hindu rule in Karagwe. These small kingdoms were not directly under the authority of Ruhinda. When he died, they became independent. Political organization. Ruhinda introduced a centralized system of government. The centralized system replaced the clan system headed clan leaders called Muharambo. Upon the death of Ruhinda, many areas that made up his kingdom declared themselves independent. Ruhinda used the clans for efficient administration. These clans were not destroyed by the Chwezi immigrants. The clan leaders Muharambo were charged with the collection of taxes, tribute, and were also in charge of religious rites. The clans were grouped into 8 bigger units for easy administration. The units included Kaina, Bugara, Kantwara, Kaziba, Ihangero, Masini, Bugobo, and Karagwe. Each of these chieftains became a nation called Ihanga, and chiefs would dismiss a clan head if his people appealed. The clan heads had political, religious, and judicial powers. These were supposed to have clan courts that settled disputes. Age sets were encouraged among the Banyambo, and young boys of the same age were called. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. After military training, they would be sent home and only recalled in times of military emergency. The few who were outstanding and very skillful were sent to the king's court, where they learnt correct court manners and language. Economic organization. They were mainly agriculturalists, and they grew crops like sorghum, millet, and bananas. They also kept the longhorn cattle. Ironworking was another economic activity, and tools which were made included hoes, spears, and arrows, which were used in agriculture and defense. The people of Karagwe also carried out trade. They exchanged trade items like ivory and iron products with Buganda and coastal traders. Social organization. The people of Karagwe believed in ancestral spirits. The Muharambo was supposed to lead over religious functions. A caste system, class systems existed in Karagwe Kingdom, with the pastoralists as rulers and farmers as the subjects. Settlement of conflict was entrusted to the clan leader Murambo, but the head of the chieftain Mahanga was the final man in everything. Revision questions. Who were the Chwezi/Bokwezi? Or what were the origins of the Bokwezi/Chwezi? Explain their importance in the history of East Africa. Or why are they still remembered in the history of East Africa? Or what were the origins of Banioro Katara Empire/Kingdom? How was the empire organized by 1350 AD? Or describe the political, social, and economic organization of Banioro Katara Empire by 1350. Or what is the importance of the Bokwezi/Chwezi in the history of East Africa? Why did their empire collapse or decline? See what led to the eventual collapse or downfall of their empire. Or what were the origins of Banioro Kingdom? We describe the organization of Banioro Kingdom before the coming of Europeans. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. How did Kabelga try to rebuild Banioro Kingdom? 6. Describe the career and achievements of Kabelga for the Kingdom of Banioro. What led to the decline of his empire after 1890? Or what led to the eventual collapse/downfall of Banioro Kingdom? 7. Describe the origins of Buganda Kingdom. What factors led to her growth and expansion up to 1850? 8. Describe the rise and expansion of Buganda Kingdom up to 1850. Why did it become so powerful during this period? 9. Describe the political, social, and economic organization of Buganda Kingdom before 1850. Why did the kingdom start collapsing after 1850? 10. How did Ruhinda establish his rule over Karagwe? Or how was the Hindu dynasty established? What changes did Ruhinda introduce? 11. Describe the origins of Ankul Kingdom. Describe the political, social, and economic organization of Ankul by 1850. The pre-colonial societies in East Africa. Nyamwezi. Origins. The Nyamwezi are Bantu-speaking who belong to the central and northern Tanzania. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. It was given to them by the coastal traders who saw them coming from the direction of the New Moon West. Originally, they lived in small chiefdoms bound together by ethnic association. During the 19th century, they developed centralized administration during the reigns of Murambo and Nyunguyamo. The structure of the Nyamwezi political organization. The Nyamwezi lived in small independent chiefdoms of about 1,000 people. They were united together by ethnic clan ties. The Nyamwezi had a decentralized system of administration. Each chiefdom headed by a chief with the title Ntemi. The position of the Ntemi was hereditary, i.e. his son/close relative succeeded him upon his death. The Ntemi had political powers and was in charge of law and order in his chiefdom. In case of population explosion in one chiefdom or succession disputes, splits were done and a new chiefdom would be created. The Ntemi was assisted by a council of elders called Wanampola. Wanampola comprised of old, experienced and knowledgeable elders. Chiefdoms were further split into small political units headed by clan heads called Gungulai. Other important chiefs among the Nyamwezi included Ritual Officer Amkor, or Army, Commander Ntwale, Information Officer Kakuma/Revenue Officer Minu. All these took orders from the Ntemi. Each chiefdom had an army with a commander appointed by the Ntemi. Before going for any battle, the Ntemi had to bless the army. The Nyamwezi copied the royal regalia from neighboring societies such as Banioro. Social organization. The Ntemi was the religious leader of his people and linked them to their ancestors. The Ntemi was the fountain of the society and received a lot of respect from his people. The Ntemi could marry as many wives as he wanted. Upon the death of the Ntemi, his body would be buried upright with beer, food and weapons. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The Nyamwezi also believed in life after death and the spirits of the dead. Ntemi would always preside over sacrifices to ancestors on behalf of his people. The Ntemi was supposed to stop any calamity that would hit his people, their fields and animals. Economic organization. The Nyamwezi were farmers and mainly grew cereals, e.g. millet and sorghum. The Ntemi always mobilized his people to grow enough food, settle land disputes and guard against misuse of land. The Nyamwezi also kept animals, for example goats and cattle. The Ntemi and his chiefs always kept large herds of animals. Tax collection was also part of their economy and the Nyamwezi always collected food as tax. The Nyamwezi had established food granaries which were directly under the Ntemi. These were used to feed his bodyguards, members of his palace and other people in case of hunger and famine. The Nyamwezi also carried out some fishing to supplement their diet. The Nyamwezi locally traded with their neighbors, e.g. the Vinza for salt and Zinza for iron. The Nyamwezi also participated in the long-distance trade with the coastal Arabs. They controlled the central trade route and provided slaves, beeswax, ivory. In return they got guns, beads and clothes. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. His empire extended northwards and eastwards to control the central caravan trade route from Tabra to Karagwe, Ujiji, Uganda and Bunyoro. Why Maramba was able to build such a big empire? Maramba was a person of boundless courage and energy which he used to build his empire. He personally led his army in battle, which encouraged and gave morale to his army to fight on. Maramba spent a lot of years in Bugomba as a captive of the Ngoni, which helped him to master the Ngoni military tactics. He used the Ngoni military tactics to build a strong army called Ruga Ruga that was very instrumental in his rise to prominence. He absorbed the conquered people, recruited the youth into his army to boost his fighting force. Maramba was a man of high determination who took no nonsense from anyone. E.g., he insisted on homage and tributes from foreigners passing through his territory. The acquiring of guns and gunpowder from the coastal Arabs helped Maramba to extend his empire wide. Maramba highly paid the Ruga Ruga who helped him to build such a big empire. Maramba's empire was strategically located in central Tanganyika, which made it a center of trade. Maramba exploited the weaknesses of his neighbors like Zinza, Sukuma, Ho and Samba to acquire territories from them. The Nyamwezi lived in small chiefdoms that were weak and disorganized, and this made it easy for Maramba to conquer them. Maramba was also far-sighted and an ambitious man who knew what he wanted and always looked for a way of getting it. Trade also helped Maramba extend his power and influence because it brought in revenue or taxes. E.g., he controlled 2 trade routes, one to Ujiji and the second one to Bunyoro and Uganda. Maramba also established diplomatic ties with many Europeans, Arabs. E.g., he invited missionaries to come to his area. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The death of Maramba led to collapse of the empire because it lacked a strong leadership. The empire was built around Maramba's personality, and without him it was bound to collapse. Maramba's successor Mpanda Shlo was too weak and could not keep the empire intact. The empire was too big to be ruled effectively by one person. Maramba always found it hard to enforce law and order from his subjects due to the vast size. Unity was also lacking. This was Maramba had left the various areas he had conquered under the traditional rulers, and upon his death many of them declared themselves independent. Maramba's neighbors were not happy about his success, e.g. the Sukuma, and this encouraged various states under him to rebel. Maramba's army of the Ruga Ruga was not dependable and became a menace after his death, e.g. looting and burning people's property. The confusion created by the Ruga Ruga forced the Germans to occupy Tanganyika in 1885. The decline of the long-distance trade and abolition of slave trade also led to the collapse of his empire. Maramba lost contact with the Arabs who used to supply him guns and gunpowder. Maramba's chiefs were weak since many were appointed just because they belonged to the ruling class. They did not merit their positions, which further weakened Maramba's empire. Increasing Europeans' interest in E finally brought Maramba's empire to an end in 1885. The Germans came under the excuse of abolishing slave trade and stopped the Ruga Ruga, and they stamped their authority in Tanganyika. Nyungu Yamoa's empire. Nyungu Yamo was born in Anyanyamb near Tabra among the Nyamwezi. He was a prince from the royal family of Anyanyamb. Nyungu Yamo was a praise name meaning pot of stone, the pot that never breaks. Nyungu Yamo was also able to build a big empire using the services of Ruga Ruga mercenaries. He also employed the Ngoni fighting methods. In 1874, he abandoned his people and formed his capital at Giwa. He attacked the Kembu in the east and also captured the trade route between Tabra and Ufippa. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. He could not hesitate to risk the lives of his soldiers, and he referred to them as Mapampiti, meaning logs, to achieve his targets. Nyungu Yamo also created a centralized system of administration. All conquered areas were given new chiefs called Fitwell plural or Ntwale singular. He divided his empire into 6 provinces, each under Ntwale directly appointed by him. The Vitwell were directly appointed by Nyungu Yamo and were his eyes and ears. In most cases they were his relatives. Nyungu Yamo created a highly disciplined army. His army underwent physical and psychological training, and didn't he lose morale after his death. Nyungu Yamo did not bother establishing good relations with Europeans. He heavily taxed them, which displeased them. In December 1884, Nyungu Yamo died as a one-eyed man. He was succeeded by his daughter Mkalila, who ruled successfully until 1893. When she died, her daughter took over and ruled until the Germans captured her capital, Kewal, and conquered it. This marked the end of Nyungu Yamoa's empire. The Germans replaced the Vitwell with new chiefs called the Kidas. The Germans later introduced direct rule. The Kikuyu Society. Origins. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. It has these 9 daughters who gave rise to the present 9 Kikuyu clans. The structure of the Kikuyu society. Political organization. The Kikuyu had a decentralized system of administration. Their political system was based on clans, with each handling its own affairs. Each clan was made up of age groups called reka. These were further subdivided into the age sets, each having its own name marking a particular event. The Kikuyu had an army, and the commander represented them on council of elders called kaima. This army composed of junior and senior warriors. Junior warriors were supposed to clear gardens for planting, defend the village against attack, and construct houses and fences. Families sharing the same taste made up a tutorial unit called Mbari. Each Mbari was under a council of elders headed by a Muramiti. The position of the Muramiti was not hereditary but was entrusted to any experienced elder. The Muramiti performed judicial functions. Members of the council of elders must have paid some goats and beer and must have circumcised the eldest son of their houses to qualify. Social organization. East African history. The rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The Kikuyu society was also organized on clan basis, and each clan was made up of age groups. Reka was further subdivided into age sets, and initiation from one age set to another was after circumcision done on both boys and girls after every 5 years. Inheritance of property always followed the mother's line matrilineal. Land and children were all owned by the mother. Economic organization. Agriculture was their main activity, and they mainly grew cereals like sorghum, maize and peas. Land was highly respected by the Kikuyu. A man with no land was not allowed to marry because his wife could not feed the family without it. On top of agriculture, the Kikuyu herded cattle, goats, sheep and kept bees. Fishing and rearing of fowls like chicken was a taboo among the Kikuyu, i.e. their social laws did not permit the consumption of fish and fowls. Division of labor existed among the Kikuyu. Men cleared the land, herded and milked animals as women planted and harvested crops and looked after the homes. The Kikuyu traded with their neighbors like the Maasai, Mbu, Como and Kamba for products like milk and butter. With the development of Aditi, the Kikuyu supplied ivory, slaves, beeswax and skins etc. to the coastal Arab traders. The Kikuyu also hunted wild animals and gathered fruits from the forest around the Kenyan highland. The Kikuyu also carried out ironworking and made iron implements like hoes for agriculture and spears for hunting. The Aitsu society. Origins. They are a branch of the plain Nilotics called the Jai. They migrated from southern Ethiopia. East African history. The rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. They first settled in Karamoja for some time and lived there for some time. In the early 18th century, the Aitsu left Karamoja. This was due to cattle rustling, overstocking, overpopulation and lack of water and pasture. They then moved southwards and settled along the shores of Lake Bassina. It is from here that they acquired the name Aitsots. Due to more pressure, others moved to eastern Uganda and western Kenya. They are settled in districts such as Kumi, Soroti, Tororo, Mbale, Kabramedo and Amure. The structure of the Aitsu society. Political organization. The Aitsots had no centralized system of government. They were organized in clans called Aika. The clans were the centers of power, and it was made up of several extended families. Each clan had a common taboo. The Amuran was the most important chief among the Aitsots. He had religious and political powers, a rainmaker, and also helped barren women to conceive. Other important chiefs included Aru, military leader who was chosen because of his bravery, and Ekaraban, village ambassador who settled disputes. Clan meetings items were important among the Aitsu because they handled cases like divorce, adultery and murder. Age-set system matry existed among the Aitsots on which wars and raids were conducted. Boys of the same age worked and fought together. Social organization. Social ceremonies were very important, e.g. marriage and birth of twins were marked with jubilations, dances, food and beer. Religiously, the Aitsots believed in a supreme being who had lesser gods, for example Apau, the god of peace, and Edek, the god of calamity. The Amuran was the religious leader and always offered sacrifices to Edek on behalf of his people. The Aitsu were bound together by strong ties of kinship, and members of the same ancestry regarded themselves as brothers. East African history. The rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. Aitsots had an age-set systematry which was always formed at a time of initiations, and it marked a change from childhood to adulthood. A man was the head of the family, and therefore his sons were supposed to inherit the father's property upon his death. Status among the Aitsu depended on how many cows one had, i.e. those who less herds were always despised and minimized. Economic organization. Initially, the Aitsu were pastoralists, and they kept cows, sheep and goats. They also reared birds, e.g. chicken and turkey. The Aitsu later adopted farming, and they grew crops such as millet, sorghum and groundnuts. Hunting was another activity among the Aitsu, and this promoted unity and socialization. The Yites also carried out some trade, and they exchanged hides and skins and ivory for bakor, beads and 9 implements from Bunyoro and Busoga. The Chaga. Origins. They are Bantu-speaking people who belong to the highland and coastal Bantu. They comprise of that group of central and northern Tanzania Bantu that continued with their migration from the Congo Basin. They are closely related to other Bantu tribes like Wina, Sukuma and Shamba. They entered Tanzania through the west using the route between Lake Tanganyika and Lake Edward. Their migration took place between 1000 and 1300 AD. They settled around Mt. Kilimanjaro in northern Tanganyika. The Chaga decided to settle around Mt. Kilimanjaro permanently and came to be known as the Highland Bantu. Political organization. The Chaga had a decentralized system of administration with chiefs at the centers of authority. The chiefs were distinguished elders in society with political and religious powers. Chiefs were always encouraged to extend the political frontiers of their chiefdoms. East African history. The rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The Chaga had political rivalries with their neighbors, especially the Maasai, over grazing lands. Below the chiefs were other influential leaders called judicial councillors. Judicial councillors were directly appointed by the chiefs. Judicial councillors were also charged with tax collection. Below the judicial councillors were the clan heads, who were prominent and influential. Clan heads were also used in maintenance of law and order in their clans. Social organization. The Chaga were organized on clan basis. They had several clans, with each clan having a clan head. Chiefs also served as chief priests and presided over religious ceremonies. They believed in a god called Ruwa. Ruwa was considered not to have been the creator of the world. Ruwa was believed to have freed mankind and provided him with fruits and plants to feed on. They believed in the powers of ancestors, i.e. life after death. Sacrifices were therefore offered to appease the spirits of the ancestors. Economic organization. Agriculture was the important economic activity among the Chaga. They grew crops such as bananas, millet and coffee. Irrigation was carried out to support agriculture during the dry season. East African history. The rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The Gala of Cushitic origin. They are a branch of the plain Nilotics who migrated from southern Ethiopia. They are thought to have originated from Ethiopia, then moved to Somalia and finally entered East Africa. They are a nomadic pastoral tribe that occupies the eastern parts of Kenya. Political organization. The Gala traditional structure was connected to the age-set system based on 10 groups. Every male belonged to a single group throughout his life. Each age-set was headed by a leader called Ababoku for 8 years. Ababoku presided over meetings and formulated laws governing his age-set. Ababoku was seen as a ritual and natural affairs expert. Ababoku was assisted by 3 other elders, all from distinguished families. From the age of 10, boys were supposed to train as warriors. The Gala thus became a fierce warrior society respected over a wide area. They carried spears and shields into the battlefields. Each age group came up for promotion every 8 years, and when this happened, its leader had to take his people to a new territory. This would eventually lead to the expansion of the Gala territory. Social organization. The Gala believed in a supreme being called Waka. East African history. The rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. They kept animals such as cattle, goats, sheep, camels and donkeys. Their constant movements in search of water and pastures brought them into conflicts with other tribes like the Maasai and Somali. They carried out small-scale agriculture and grew grains, peas, beans, vegetables and pepper. Limited fishing and hunting were also carried out. Traded with their neighbors like the Somali, Ethiopians and Swahili Arabs. The Maasai. Origins. They fall under the pastoral group of the plain Nilotics. They moved from the area west of Lake Turkana around the 17th century. They existed in 2 groups, i.e. the Kwavi and Perko Maasai. They occupy the area called Machokos in southern Kenya, and some are found in northern Tanzania. Political organization. They were a decentralized society with no central authority. They were divided into 16 independent clans. Clans were the basis of their political organization. Each clan had its own territory, cattle brand, pasture and water supply. Leadership was exercised through the age-set system. Age-sets were linear and their names were unique and never repeated. East African history. The rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. A young man became a member after circumcision performed at 18 years. After initiation, the boys became junior warriors called Omuran. The Omuran lived separately in Manyatas, where they were drilled in military techniques. From junior warriors, they progressed to senior warriors and finally senior elders. Social organization. The Maasai believed in a supreme creator called Nkai. Nkai was the source of life and punished bad people. The Laban prayed to the Nkai on behalf of his people. Senior elders helped organize society, especially during difficult periods. Women and children were the lowest members of the society. The junior warriors Moran were charged with defending the homesteads. They conducted raids and surveyed areas for grazing. Women were also initiated every year. They built temporary structures called manietas because they are always on the move. Economic organization. The Poko Masai were pastoralists who kept cattle, goats and sheep. Kwavi Masai were cultivators who grew crops like finger millet and sorghum. They traded with other communities like the Kikuyu and exchanged their hides and skins for beans, tobacco, sugarcane and millet. Women did the marketing of goods. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. The wars were fought in two separate intervals, i.e. in 1815 and in 1840. The first major war took place in 1815 in the Uasin-Gishu Plateau, which ended in the defeat of the Kwavi Masai. In 1840, the Kwavi reorganized themselves with the help of the Laikipia and they drove the Poko Masai out of the Rift Valley. Between 1870 and 1875, the Poko decisively attacked and defeated the Kwavi, killing many of them. Causes of the Masai civil wars. The Poko, who were the pastoral Masai, always despised the Kwavi, who were farmers, leading to the wars. The Poko claimed that the Kwavi were finishing their land and that very soon they would not have enough grazing lands for their animals. The Kwavi farmers also claimed that animals of the Poko were destroying their farms during grazing, leading to the wars. The Kwavi always expected help from their neighbours the Laikipia, and this gave them morale to fight against the Poko. The succession disputes between the leaders of the Masai after the death of Laban Mbashan also led to the outbreak of the wars. The Kwavi Masai had always defeated the Poko, who had for long wanted revenge for their losses. Poko were always a proud society who took a lot of pride in fighting, and when they got the opportunity they had to engage the Kwavi in warfare. The two groups had participated in long-distance trade and had acquired guns which encouraged them to fight against each other. The Poko always believed that the Kwavi had deliberately spread animal diseases which claiming many of their animals' lives. The youths among the Kwavi were always blamed for stealing the animals that belonged to the Poko, which led to the wars. The Poko believed that they were the rightful owners of all the Masai land and didn't want it to be taken over by the Kwavi. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. A lot of property was destroyed during the wars, e.g. farms and homesteads. The wars created a period of insecurity in Masil, and there was depopulation in the area as many people migrated to safer areas. The Poko emerged victorious and the Kwavi were greatly weakened. The wars greatly weakened Masai supremacy in Kenya, and the Nandi emerged as the most powerful tribe in western Kenya. The wars resulted into famine and suffering in Masil and due to neglect of agriculture. The succession struggles ended with the separation of the Masai, e.g. Laban Sendayo and his group occupied Tanzania and Laban Lenona's group remained in Kenya. Natural disasters like smallpox and locust invasion further weakened the Masai influence. The Masai were easily colonized by the British due to the decline in their power. The Masai were tricked into signing treaties with the British which forced them into reserves. Masiland was later on taken over by the British colonialists. The Acholi. Origins. They fall under the bigger group of the Luo-speaking communities. They currently occupy northern Uganda in districts such as Gulu, Paida and Kitgum. They emerged out of intermarriages between the Luo, Aika and Sudanic Madi. They originally lived in Bahr el Ghazal in southern Sudan. Their migration took place between 1200 to 1350 AD. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms. Clan councils upheld traditional, religious and legal customs. The family was the basic social unit. The man had a lot of power over his wife and children. The Arwath appointed village heads called Jogos. The duty of the Jogos was to maintain law and order in their respective villages. The Jogos were also charged with tribute and tax collection. The Acholi had no standing army, but the youth were supposed to defend the chieftains in case of war. The youths were also supposed to carry out raids for cattle. Social organization. They believed in a supreme god called Joklabanga as the creator and sustainer of the world. The Acholi always prayed to him through the spirits. The Arwat was the religious head of his people. He was believed to have direct links with the ancestors. Inheritance followed the father S line. Land was communally owned. It was the duty of the clan heads to protect it on behalf of his people. Economic organization. Their main economic activity was pastoralism and they kept shorthorn cattle. They also carried out agriculture and grew crops such as millet, peas, beans and sorghum. They highly valued cows for prestige, pride, wealth and rewards. Fishing was also carried out by those who stayed near the rivers. They traded with their neighbors like the Langi, Anyoro and Sudanese. Revision questions. Describe the political, social and economic organization of any two of the following societies. Ekiki, B. Naimezi, Siatsop, D. Karamajan, E. Gala, F. Chaga, G. Mosai, H. Acholi. East African history, the rise of the Interlacustrine kingdoms.